And he doesn't mean him, he means the customers. And that's where everybody should be focusing in Amazon, namely to keep providing what the customers need. On the other side, we also see that, for example, banking is notorious for giving responsibility. But they also have the highest stress rate of people ever. Okay, so if you can work 15 years in banking without being stressed, either you have some really good sleeping medicine, and I would like to know about the prescription then. Otherwise, you are really hardcore in just freezing down your frame and eliminating the problems. And all of us who are gentle spirits, we normally suffer a little bit when we need to just be completely cynical about peers who actually want to do something, but then are not in a position where they can actually make the change happen. So grading that and understanding their limitations is a key in that achieving that social synergy. Prototyping, which is kind of the next thing, is something where I think we have been very good at just picking up from the early startups and saying, how do we launch a new division, or how did we, for example, launch the beginning of e-tailing and take that in. We almost launched it in some cases like a separate business. And we've been good at taking on those entrepreneurial models where we've gone from a feasibility study to some stage 1 funding, stage 2 funding. But I think we often get a little bit sleepy when it comes to the pilot study and then scaling it out internally. If it's a new business unit, fine, clear borders, everybody knows where it is. But if it's internal, we stick with the legacy. We stay in system 1 thinking. We don't remove ourselves from that box. And this is where often I wonder, how deep do we actually go into the stack, and we ask ourselves before we say, now this is a management decision that we want to roll out. I mean, if we say how many here are actually capable of launching some changes without doing first a pilot study? Just roll it out, just no risk. Okay, good, we're over that one. With pilot study, when you then start rolling out and you know there are scalability issues, do you break down your projects into an R&D part where you say, we don't actually know what these concepts look like? There's this guy over there, he talks about cloud. I'm afraid of heights. You know, what is he talking about? Or are we talking about that people have a clear idea of those new concepts and how to actually interact with them? R&D, separating out. Do we even have focus on that on our business plan? I see many Gantt charts, and none of them pull it out and make it explicit. So when it comes to going through from R&D, applied R&D, and then going into deployment mode, are we really good at separating those phases out? Or do we, again, let system 1 thinking take over and just say, it worked on my laptop, let's roll it out to all our servers. And then we see disasters pending to happen. So that's a clear question that leaves open. Another thing is some organizations, they simply don't change their organization to actually suit the change. I would bet that 80% in here have been experiencing that. We take on new tasks, we take on new changes. By the way, could you cut the headcount by 20%? Okay, that's just a classic one. And by the way, we need to start tomorrow because we don't have time to train or increase understanding of it. So doing that preparation and becoming very conscious about when we jump to those conclusions is what I worry about when people say, okay, let's make the future of the supply chain and then put in the changes that we want to create. We got to go through that whole tedious engineering process to rip it apart and understand how it works. By the way, I don't know what you call when you depart from legacy process. Maybe somebody can help me in here. What's the latest buzzword for that? In German, the government, they launched a report where they call it innovation management. That's where you just make the legacy processes disappear. I guess it's a follow-up from Industry 4.0. Good. Now, the last thing, and you heard me this morning already on it, is you need data for that process. And I think a lot of people, they launch way too far into the process without ever getting the data right. There is a clear consequence of that. Not only that we manage the data with assumptions about what really needs to happen, but we take it way too prematurely and jump to conclusions. How many here have just had a business case where they say, this is a brilliant business case, and then when they kind of start handing over the project to those who need to implement it, they see, okay, there's a stack of assumption where we just basically go, O, A, E, and then the card house falls apart. I've seen it at least 5 times over the last 10 years. The next thing is on the de-risking of the projects. I think one of the most impressive companies when it comes to making innovative changes is DARPA, the US Defense Administrative Research Program administration. They throw in really groundbreaking research, and then they expect industry to then start picking it up and doing something about it. And there is this quadrant built up from Donald Stokes, who says that he looks after whether it's practical and whether it's necessary for fundamental understanding. And if it's not practical but fundamental, he calls it the Borg quadrant. And otherwise, he says that it's where it's user-inspired practical and still necessary. It's a Pasteur model, long story for it. But the real balance that comes around is Bohr is more work with curiosity-driven research where we try out different options. We make small experiments and we innovate. Edison's quadrant up there is pretty much pure applied research where you go in and say, okay, we have this strategic capability we would like to have, but we need somehow to get that in to the organization at a later stage. Typically, when people talk big data right now, that's what they mean. If they put a product tag on it, I'm pretty sure that half the group who's listening in on it don't know where they're taking it. Pasteur's quadrant, as the other one, is expanding basic scientific knowledge and then just trying to push our societal needs. Industry uses that very much when it comes to finding standards. How do we go about it? So, and then there is an unnamed quadrant which doesn't really require any, because if it's not for practical use and not fundamental research, I guess it's something else. I don't know. Entertainment? Good. So with that, what is really interesting is that the concepts which are taken apart breaks it down into that most projects of change that we present, they contain all three classes. They both contain some places where the concepts are new. They're pretty pure R&D. We've never worked with it. We've never seen it before. The next one comes in where we do some combinations of those new concepts, and then we call it applied R&D. And at the end of that, we see then finally we need to go into deployment where we have maybe never worked in that environment before. And this is again where we need to ask ourselves a question. When we formulate these Gantt diagrams and these projects for change to, again, designing that supply chain that we are pursuing, are we de-risking our projects by looking critically, not about what were the milestones according to the business plan from the top management, but what are the milestones in a manner where we de-risk the project by first making sure that we got all the new concepts and we don't need to worry about any of the new components, that we have a clear idea after that how we combine these components and bring them together in a coherent entity. And then finally, of course, when we go out and deploy them. I can give you tons of examples. I'm sure if you just have 10 seconds to think about it on your own, there could be a benefit in going and shifting around project the way we design them, from going just trying to meet some deadline or some launch date, but actually thinking, how do we coordinate so we de-risk it up front? So, I put in the frog. So if you don't remember anything else, at least there was a bit of green on the screen. But any questions to this one? I hope what you take away from here is that when you go in and think about how you're going to create the change program for the supply chain to make the change you need, keep in mind what is system 1 and 2 thinking, and then de-risk your projects, because otherwise I would call it gambling, and that's not what our engineering discipline should be known for. Thank you very much.